Thanks to Matthew for inviting me and for putting this great event together. It's great for me as an economist. I tend to look at things from a very high level down. It's great to hear this sort of boots on the ground type discussion. So the title of my talk is The Demand for Internship Experience. This is joint work with David Yeager and Alan Seals. Without them, this wouldn't be possible. So my co-authors are critically important to the success of this project, so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention them. Before I start looking at employer demand for different types of internship experience, I do want to start with a little bit of background on the internship market because I think a lot of this information is not well known. I think one of the things that's clear from all the discussions today, internships are becoming a more important part of the labor market. There seems to be a direct connection between interning and work. And estimates vary depending on the survey you look at, but over half roughly are interning at some point during their college career. And many of those turn into jobs for students. Okay. Unfortunately, in our research, we can't study those intra-firm matches, but we can look at the between-firm effects of internships, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But again, back to the basics. Internships tend to be unpaid. Obviously that's been a theme that's come up a lot here, and I've done some research on that. I'm not going to talk about that very much in my talk, but if you have questions about that, I'm happy to take them. And internships tend to be part-time as well. Turns out that connection between paid and the time commitment is critical. Full-time internships are in effect jobs, and I think someone asked a question about this. I think that's kind of the difference between a paid internship is that it tends to be a lot like a job, and when you have a job, people pay you. And I think some of the ones that are unpaid tend to be a little less job-like, and they tend to have that characteristic of part-time, right? Part-time is not like a normal job. Certainly for college graduates, most college graduates work full-time jobs. Okay. So I also like to show this map. Matt brought this up in his opening remarks that it could be the case that students in some parts of the United States may not have as much access to internship opportunities, and I think that is an accurate statement. So what we did is we scraped internship advertisements from a particular website that I can't tell you the name of it per IRB agreement, but we calculated the number of internships in the metropolitan area and divided it by the number of 18 to 25-year-olds in that metropolitan area. And one of the things that really jumps out from this figure is that internships are concentrated in cities. And given that we're in Wisconsin, I also like to point out that, let's see if I can do the pointer here. Okay. Well, anyway, if you look at Wisconsin there's not a lot of internship activity. Okay. One of the things that Wisconsin public policymakers worry about is the so-called brain drain, where our students are schooled here and they leave and go to Minneapolis or Chicago. I think this map points to maybe why that could be happening, or at least part of the explanation for why that kind of thing is happening. So big cities is where the activity is at for the most part. This has kind of also been pointed out, but it also comes out in our data too that internships are overwhelmingly concentrated in certain kinds of occupation categories: business and finance, arts, design, entertainment, sports, and media, as well as sales. Interestingly, the arts, design, entertainment, sports, and media are way disproportionately unpaid. The business and finance is about evenly split, and then the sales is overwhelmingly paid, and I should note those are also tend to be full-time, right? Again, more job-like. Why I really got interested in this was the last set of bullet points, because I'm an economist, I'm interested in markets, and it turns out the internship market looks a lot like regular labor markets. When internships are job-like, firms pay. When unemployment's low, firms tend to pay. When minimum wage is high, firms tend not to pay. So you have some cities, Berkeley, Chicago, that have higher than federal minimum wages. We're seeing less internships in those areas. So I think that I have some concerns about mandating minimum wage payments from firms. I think you'd get less internships. That could be good or bad depending on what your view on internships is, I suppose. But nevertheless, it does affect the margin of whether to pay or not pay. Okay, so do internships help students? We have lots and lots of anecdotal evidence that students that intern with Firm A, they end up working for Firm A. I've seen those estimates as high as 50% of them make that transition. And for people that have interned more than once, I think it was the NACE group said that the probability of getting a job offer was about 90% for those multiple internships that students had done. There's only 2 studies that I'm aware of that have used randomized or natural experiments, and I was the author of one of those studies in 2016. In both of those studies, one in Germany, the second one, Senator et al., find the same kind of thing. There's sort of positive effects on labor market outcomes associated with interning. And all the different studies, whether it's correlational or sort of causal inference studies, say the same thing. However, there's a few things missing here. We don't really know why this is happening, and I think one of the themes that Matt opened the conference up with was talking about skills. And so I'm going to try to speak to that a little bit. We're trying to use the data that we've collected here, get as much of it as we can, using the text from resumes and ads to try to piece together this puzzle. So we look at initial employment prospects from new college grads. So this is people just graduating into the labor force, and I want to emphasize the initial employment being a really important part of one's career. Turns out that where you start has a big effect on where you end up, not only your starting wage, but your earnings profile over your life cycle is really important. So that first job is super important. So graduating in a recession, for example, is not just a bump in the road, it's often a permanent harm to the worker. Same thing here. So that's why we're interested in looking at how do internships facilitate that initial employment opportunity. So we submitted 37,872 unique resumes that were randomly generated. That is a lot. And we applied to about 9,500 jobs, a little bit less than that. And we sent 4 resumes to each job. And what we're interested in this study, if you're not familiar, is do employers give us a positive response? And the randomization of the resume characteristics allow us to interpret the estimates that we get as causal estimates. And we're interested, again, in do employers call you back? Do they want to do an interview, give you a positive response, that type of thing? And the second thing that we do, where I mentioned the skills, we do some machine learning. We take the resume, the internships on the resume, we run them through the machine learning algorithm. We take the text from the ad and we run it through the machine learning algorithm. And what that does is it gives us an occupation code to assign to the student internship and to the job that they applied to. Okay? That allows us to study, is there some interaction between what the student did, their sort of activities on the internship, and the tasks demanded by the firms. And so we get at that task information by using the ONET data. And I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a nice resource for all the different characteristics of different occupations. So we incorporate that as our metric of task content of the internships and the jobs. So I'll just go over this quickly because I'm just going to focus on internships. This was a huge study where we randomized a number of characteristics. So we assigned everyone a name, an address, a university. There's, I think, 13 or 12 in our study. A different major, there's 8 of them, et cetera. So all these